Right. Well, first, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce René Stevens tonight. René is an architect who comes from Holland originally, but lives in North Wales, and he's going to tell you all about his work and how he came to be involved in the sort of things that we do. And I think it should be a really interesting talk. We had a run through a couple of weeks ago, and I was really taken aback by some of his slides. So I'm hoping some of those appear tonight, because you're in for a treat. So without sort of prolonging the introduction, I'll get back to the waiting room, and I'll just leave you in the safe hands of Mr. René Stevens. Good evening.
Okay, then I will take over the screen. There we go.
You all right?
Visible?
Done. All done.
Great. So you would wonder, architecture is a symphony of form. What has that to do with dowsing? I think everything. And I will tell you that during my talk. Let me see. I put my talk together. It consists of three parts. So this is the first one, how I got intrigued by quality and consciousness.
No. Stay here.
And consciousness came in later in my life. The second part will be about my exploration Odyssey. And the last part, environmental influencers and stressors, so the dowsing part. My personal quest, how can you figure out the properties of the whole given the properties of the parts? And this will be a red thread through my presentation. This guy is a Swiss artist, Urs Werli, he's called. And he started as a tidying up person. So he takes famous art and then decompose it in parts, as you can see on the slide. And later on, he went also to other parts of life, like this one. And he says, well, it makes life neat and tidy. But it all depends on how you look at things. So from your perspective, things can be opposite things can be both true, depending if you look at from the parts or from the whole. And so when you drift above, you can see, okay, both people are right. One sees a square and the other sees a circle. And when I make a little jump to build up to architecture, the selection process of clothing, and clothing is sometimes called the second skin we have as humans, is like that iceberg. So 10% above the water is about the logical mind, so that your clothes has to be protecting and of course functional. And the 90% underwater is all emotional stuff, like the embellishment of your image or your persona. You want to belong to a group, so you dress alike. You want to express your identity, or just for the reason to feel good. On the other hand, when you compare that with buildings, accommodation, it is the world upside down. So when you look any brief that an architect gets, or he prepares himself, is that 90% of the information is about functional and technical stuff. And only 10% is about the aesthetical. And most of the times that is not even the text from the principle, but it is from what the architect envisions what you should like as art or architecture. So it is all about smart versus holistic communicating. So this picture of this car, you can see, well, it's exactly what you get. What you see is what you get. So all the parts are there. But still, it looks different than when you look at the whole. because the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And this concept they use also in advertisement already a long time. This is an advertisement of Saab cars from the, I think, beginning of 1980. On the left side, it's all about logic. How does it perform? And on the right side, it's all about feeling. How does it touch your heart? And you can also refer to cars as your third skin. So you're dressed up with your second skin. And then for some people, they also need a car to put something extra in their image. And the same goes actually also for buildings. You can also say that the building is a third skin. And it's all about the left brain and the right brain, and actually about the balance between those two. So that's my work. So I'm not a designing architect anymore. That was only in the beginning of my career. I'm a consultant, helping organizations to find exactly this balance. And more in a minute. So in my vision, what clothing is for a person, that is a building for an organization. So the same things that I showed, like functional, it should fit you, and all the emotional parts, goes also with buildings. Only most organizations are not aware of this. And you can see that you have different dress codes from casual until business, and you have a male version and a female version. And actually, when you look at the accommodation, this is like a jigsaw puzzle with 10,000 plus pieces. And just like as most people start a puzzle of this complexity, you start with the edges and then the frame, and then you figure out some parts here and there. That is actually what I'm doing already since a long time, because I want to understand the whole picture. But when I reach that point, if I reach that point, the next challenge is that I have to make it as simple as possible to communicate what I found. And actually, something like this jigsaw with only 6-7 pieces will be the thing that will appeal to people. And that brings me to the next step, the next part of my presentation, the exploration Odyssey, the evolving story of a profession as architect. And I will come to the dowsing at the end, but here you see already how it is used as architects in the medieval times, that they use dowsing to find the right spot to erect a building. But in the Roman times, there was an architect called Vitruvius. I think it was something like 30 after Christ. And he wrote 10 books on architecture. And until today, these are the Bibles for architects in the West. And he came up with 3 fundamental principles of architecture. So it should be useful, of course. It should have beauty. And of course, it should be well made and durable over time. And maybe you have heard about the term architect as a master builder. Well, this architect Vitruvius certainly was a master builder, because he managed to use all these 3 parts, fundamental principles, and balance them into a whole building. And Michelangelo was another one. Leonardo da Vinci was one. They all understood these 3 principles. Well, besides architecture, I studied also Master of Business Administration. So I look at my assignments from those 2 perspectives, so the circle and the square, and try to figure out how they actually fit together. And for that, I came up with a 4th principle, and that is money. So how can you use a building as a value-adding machine? So the architect as business optimizer, that's how I call myself. maybe you are aware, but most of the time, roughly 90% of our lives, we are in buildings. So the home, the place where you work, etc. And it is also well documented that the built environment can cause many health disorders and stress. So, to solve this, it is required that you have an interdisciplinary approach. So it is not only the square, it's not only the circle, it is both of them and probably even more. You probably even need dowsers as well. So the environment is a catalyst for human performance, and because of that, it has a strategic impact. And I'm not the first one who comes to that conclusion. There was another famous guy, this one. He had a quote, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. So there is an interaction between buildings and the users of these buildings, the occupants, and actually it's vice versa. So it is about the inner environment of the people and the outer environment of the built environment. And what I came up can be summarized in these four pictures, and actually there are two, but opposites of each other. So is the work environment for free range people or for battery cage people? And we all know that it does not work for animals like chickens and cows and pigs, but still we keep on trying to make it working for humans and fit them all in a box. On the left hand, you see a meadow next to a swimming pool. And these are two pictures of this Swiss artist. The lower picture is actually how our fundamentalist property and facility managers and some or most accountants want us to behave, because then we fit perfectly in their spreadsheets and in their systems. But actually how people want to use a field next to a swimming pool is the picture above. Later on, I will bring all these four pictures more together. So now the question is, who are you? Well, you also consist of a few parts, and I call this whole system the inner environment. And when I combine those two things, inner and outer environment, you get a picture like this. So on the left, the inner environment, all these things of body, mind, spirit, and heart. And on the other hand, our natural environment, the built environment, and the social environment. And all of these things are interacting with that individual in the middle. And not only that, it goes in two-way interaction, actually. So to bring it a little bit, zoom it a little bit in, I say, of my definition about the learn work environment consists of three pillars: the physical part, so the location and the building, and the digital part. Nowadays we all have a digital workplace and a digital office. And last but certainly not least, the social part about the usage and behavior agreements. So the first column is the domain of the real estate / property managers and the facilities managers. Then you have the IT department in the middle and the human resource department on the right. When I bring all this together, you can ask yourself the question, does the environment meet your requirements? Because then you have a good environment. So it is the finding the balance between efficiency and effectiveness. So between the battery cage workplace or the free range workplace. When you do this, you're already more than halfway, but there's another dimension in the horizontal axis, and that is about, there's something more here. So on the upper part, are we doing the right things? And on the lower picture, do we do things in the right way? And the other axis is controlling versus inspiring. And it is, as I said, is it in control for all these people who are trying to manage buildings, or is it just doing that what we as users want that it does? So I'll put it in a different picture. The inner and outer environments are actually one ecosystem. So you can be in your own bubble on the right, but by moving in that own bubble in your own etheric field, it will create ripples, and that will affect other bubbles, but also the outer environment. Or say it in a different way, everything is vibration, and vibration of certain frequency produces shapes of specific geometry. And then we are back to architecture again. Some will say, but yeah, I'm still confused. I would say yes, but now at a much higher level. Because the main thing is that vibrations affect matter, but also living beings like us. And maybe you have seen this or did this experiment when you were at secondary school, a plate with sand or salt, and then with a violin bow, it is a vibration is created, and then several shapes, depending on the frequency, will appear. So you could say that sound is an audible manifestation of vibration, and it will affect you, because now it affects the salt. And because it is on a black plate, we can see what is happening. But actually, there's a lot more going on that we cannot see or sense with our five senses. Or saying in a different way, geometry or architecture is the music we hear with our eyes. For instance, here you have on the right these four smaller images. This is the same thing. Cymatic pictures taken from a oval plate with sand, and then sending a certain frequency through it. And you can see there's almost a one-to-one match with the turtle. There's a real picture on the left. So that shows you already there is something going on, that vibration has an effect on the living things and on matter in general around us. And normally in textbooks or or in science, vibration or frequency is shown as a wave, but actually it is not a wave. Actually, this is a bubble with frequencies inside. So you can ask the question now: why does this space feel good? Actually, there's a similar question to why does this music move me to tears? So sound does not travel as waves, but as bubbles. And why I'm showing this will be clear in a minute. So we know that the shape of a violin improves the quality of the tone. The picture is the inside of a violin. And the shape provides a resonant chamber for crystalline structures, such as materials, in this case the violin, but also biological life, like the turtle or us humans. So there is a direct effect on us by this soup of vibrations that is around us. So when we look at an orchestra, when they perform a musical symphony, it is important that all the instruments are tuned. So that's, we'll say, in balance, playing with the right intensity and duration. And when you want to have a high-level performance, all these instruments should be in sync. So the same goes with a building. So the built environment is equally important. Also there, all the building components should be in sync, like the shapes and the parts, the materials, the colors, including the relationship with nature. And to put it in a more, how we say, simplistic diagram. So on the left side, you have the work environment with certain levels, several levels. On the right hand, you have the music experience. So a string of music notes or building performances gives an experience. for the one who is experiencing that, so hearing it, or being in a building, or looking at a building. So for the music, you ask yourself questions: what instruments, how many of them, when should which instrument play, and with which intensity, and for how long? And the components to make that musical symphony are percussion instruments, wind instruments, and string instruments. So when I make that analogy with the built environment, then it is about what performance or quality is required, how much of that performance, and when do you need that performance? Is it all the time, or just so now and then, and with which intensity, and for how long? So these three parts from the Roman architect Vitruvius are actually the three fundamental architectural principles. And with these three, just like these instruments, you build your building experience or your environment experience. To bring it all together and make it even more visible, it is like a customer journey through a building. So architecture is not only a visual vibration. When you go through a building, it is even more. When you are in a building, it is like walking through the instrument itself as the instrument is being played. So all these vibrations of the building material, the shapes of the room that you are in, the material, the finishing of the material, the colors, the light, all these vibrations create a vibrational cocktail, and that will influence the people in that building. And that is the reason that I call architecture a symphony of form. So it is, we have to understand the pulsation of the whole living, learn, work environment ecosystem, instead of only looking at the symptoms of some of its parts. So it's most of the time the case. By focusing on, by only focusing on the differences and the isolated topics, you will never solve the problems with the learn work environment. And probably they will even increase further, because you are focusing on just the parts and not on the whole. So that brings me to the last part, where I try to make a connection with dowsing. And as you probably all know, there are influences or stressors, and some of them are 24/7 around us. They will have an impact on us. And these 5 categories, so that are summed up here. Some words I made up. So archipathic stress, that's my invention, and spiritpathic stress, the same thing. The other 2, geopathic and technopathic, you probably heard already about, but I make a difference between these 5. And normally it is not only one, most of the time it's all 5 of them working together. So they are stacked on top of each other. And by that they have a big influence. So again, when you dowse for instance, Earth anomalies, it's only one facet of a multifaceted diamond we are talking about. So to really address issues, you have to look at the whole picture. But unfortunately, many people have this attitude. Yeah, I cannot see it, so it can't be true. And so it is all about how to perceive energy. How do we perceive energy? So the obvious things that we can perceive with our 5 senses, the objects, the material things. And there are some energy vibrations that cannot be perceived by the 5 senses, but we can measure them, like radio waves, electricity, Wi-Fi. Maybe some of you say, yeah, well, but some people are really highly sensitive, so they can perceive this, but most of the people cannot. And then the last part, you cannot perceive them, and you can also not measure them. And then, I mean, measuring with the tools we have. And actually that makes brings me to the conclusion that if we cannot measure it, does not mean that it does not exist. It only means that we have poor measurement instruments. So, dowsing, finally. So architecture and urban planning are actually evolved out of the ancient practice of geomancy, the divining of the earth, in this case by dowsing, to arrange buildings on the sides on sites auspiciously. So the main thing that these ancient architects did was they wanted to make a connection between the nature, the heartbeat of the nature, and to create it into a sacred power spot. So many of these megalithic sites that we visit and douse, they are there only, as some say, as a marker, as a signpost that there is something going on at that spot. And in the very, very old days, the ancient times, these dowsers or people were maybe even more sensitive that didn't use any tools, maybe they just could sense it, and they erected those big menhirs and other stone structures. So by tuning that architecture to the heartbeat, you actually create that harmonic instrument that I was talking about previous. So now my journey of dowsing, I said already to Nigel that many years ago I was in Switzerland on holiday, and I saw on a building plot somebody walking with a wooden stick, and I thought I knew something about dowsing. Yeah, probably it is still in use. They were dowsing where to build that building on that plot. So I just made a record of it and left it on by that. And many years later, actually in 2018, I was watching a episode on the Spirit on Netflix, Gaia, and there was an American hotshot scientist. He was very much impressed by the radionic associations here in the UK that he visited some time before. And I thought, well, if this hotshot left brain scientist is impressed by radionics, then better I also check it out. So I looked at the internet, and yeah, it's just around the corner. I was that time living in the Netherlands. And it turned out that they had an introduction weekend. So I went there, and that brought a lot of synchronicity on my path. Because, a long story short, actually that is the reason that I met Adrian, and that's the reason that I was at the Earth Energy Reignited weekend. I think it was last year. And that's why I'm here, because there I got to know this Earth Energy Zoom group. So in by my understanding, you have 3 levels of dowsing or radiesthesia. That is the mental physic method that most of the people are using. But there's also a second one. It's called the French physical radiesthesia. And they approach it more from a scientific standpoint. And they designed specifically calibrated pendulums and rod instruments to do that thing. But unfortunately, they were experimenting with things they didn't understand. You probably all have heard about negative green. And at that time, it was not well understood. They figured out that it had an influence on people with cancer. They could cure it even. But what I did not know is that it had such strong vibration that it created also cancer when you are too long in that environment. So one of the pioneers of this group, he died actually because of that. Because he created a huge instrument in his laboratory, and that killed him in the end. So the whole group was closed down for many years. And then there came a Egyptian architect, who is, by the way, also very much interested in dowsing and energy power spots. And he asked himself the question, this very positive energy in what people call power spots, so Stonehenge, the holy wells, cathedrals, you name them. Can that be measured? And not only that, can it be created and directed? Can it be actually be applied in daily life? So this architect, Dr. Ibrahim Karim, he invented biogeometry. That's the third dimension. And I met this person again via Gaia. He was giving a lecture there. I contacted him and asked him if he was willing to give me a podcast interview, and he did. Not one, but even two. So the first one, it was in December 2019. So that was my next major step. By now it's already watched more than 12,000 times. And just this June, he gave me a second one because he wrote a book about his science of quality. And that is, I think, about 2,500 already times watched. So it is too much to go into detail now. So that's why I put the links here. You can watch them because they're both about 2 hours each. And what really intrigues me with this approach is that he looks at it from a quantitative point of view. So not only qualitative, but also quantitative. And he has a whole worldview created around that, which you will see in if you watch these two videos about the podcast. And to sum it up, yeah, here you see that thing that the CIA called weird science or freaking magic on the right side. So obviously he's not touching the tuning fork on the right, but still is something going on. So exactly that is what I'm talking about, that there is a cocktail of frequencies. Architects or in general people build environments where there is really a soup of frequencies, and they are all creating an impact on the people in these buildings. You all probably know the feeling that in some buildings you enter and you say, my God, this is awful. How can I get out as soon as possible? And other ones, you have to feel, wow, this is a nice vibe here. I want to stay here. So that sums it all up for me. If there is any input from one of you, or you have an introduction to a next building or stepping stone in my Odyssey, it's very much appreciated. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, feel free to ask me.